Good afternoon, guys. Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on May the 3rd to close out a week with another great episode I have planned out for you guys here today. Before we start, remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And as always, guys, if you have any questions or comments during today's show, please remember to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using this link, I'm able to see your question or comment on my chat box. Then I could read it out loud and get your guys' perspective on anything that I have to say or on the topic we're talking about. It's a lot more engaging and it's a massive help for this show. So if you could, please use the tip and donations link. Again, gsmcpodcast.net. We would greatly appreciate it. And to start off on today's episode, we're going to go over to the city of New York and talk about their quarterback situation. Not really a battle, so to say, in March when this whole conversation started, when the New York Giants signed Drew Lock to a simple 1-year, $5 million deal. Really just to be a backup, just a 1-year deal, see how it goes, and then maybe next offseason we'll revisit and you can stay longer if you excel at your job. There was not really any smoke to that whole situation. Then you have the draft, and there was more noise around really the prospects, J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, around the New York Giants. Are they going to take anybody at 6? They tried allegedly to trade up to number 3 to try and get Drake May. That didn't work out. J.J. McCarthy was sitting there at 6, but also the Giants decided not to stick with him. Then afterwards, you have the press conferences from Joe Shane, Brian Dable, and of course they were going to get asked about the quarterback situation, if there was any thought about drafting one of these guys, what was their sort of feedback on that. And like you'd expect, Joe Shane really backed up Daniel Jones, saying he was their starter. He's been saying it since January that wasn't going to change. They were going to stick with Daniel Jones. But I can't help but think, because of the recent reports that have come out around Drew Lock and around Daniel Jones, that this could become a bit closer than a lot of people think. According to NFL Network, experts around Daniel Jones, the New York Giants expect Jones to be the primary starter when he heads into training camp. Once it all starts going and real football starts, that's really when Daniel Jones is expected to be back with the New York Giants after his ACL tear. And once he's back, the initial feeling is that he'll get the first team reps. He'll be the starter. But there is starting to be a feeling around the NFL that there is a good chance that Drew Lock could surprise a lot of people at training camp and make it a bit closer than most people think, according to NFL Network. Like I mentioned at the beginning, back in March when they signed Drew Lock, this wasn't really a conversation, but now people are starting to think differently, and I always find it interesting with these situations where the Giants, everybody was pretty surprised that they didn't draft a quarterback at 6, and, I felt that they should have got Malik Neighbors. They did that. That's fine. I was okay with it, but I was still pretty surprised by everybody reacting like, oh my God, they drafted a wide receiver. How could they not draft a quarterback? I thought it was pretty reasonable, and I always think it's fascinating when these things sort of line up and connect almost afterwards, after you gather some more facts, because maybe my thought process behind all of this is maybe they don't try and get a quarterback this year because they sort of feel that these rumors are true. There's some truth to some of these rumors, and they feel that maybe they could have something in Drew Lock. Maybe this could turn into a quarterback competition, so it would be unnecessary to bring in another quarterback when you think Daniel Jones and Drew Lock are a lot closer than most people would anticipate. Now, that's my thinking, but I'm not just throwing that out there, just as a random thought. There is some interesting facts that I found in regards to my theory that I'm throwing out there. First, like I mentioned, Drew Lock was asked about the quarterback battle when he was signed. One of the initial things he clarified was that when he signed with the Giants, those conversations, they told him that he was coming in with the mindset of being the backup, being that number 2 guy. And any question that came to him, he sort of deflected and didn't really answer it directly on trying to beat out Daniel Jones or something like that. He really kept it pretty tame and just accepted that he was going to be the number 2 quarterback. But what's fascinating about it is that the Seattle Seahawks general manager, Joe Schneider, in an interview back when they lost Drew Lock in free agency, he told 710 Seattle Sports, he basically said, in direct quotes, basically the Giants sold him on the opportunity to compete to be the starter, talking about what the Giants allegedly told Drew Lock to get him to sign in free agency for the New York Giants. So again, Drew Lock comes into New York thinking one thing, or saying one thing, I should say, and later it comes out that John Schneider from the Seattle Seahawks believes that the Giants basically sold Drew Lock on the idea that he could compete to be the starter. Talking about Drew Lock in that way, it makes you think now, Drew Lock says one thing, admits he's going to be the backup, but from the opposite side, somebody who doesn't really have any reason to make this up, because the general feeling around Seattle's general manager, Seattle just in general, was that they were okay with keeping Drew Lock as a backup to compete with Geno Smith. They had no problem with that. They ended up losing him, and I don't see any reason why John Schneider would say that as a lie. There's no real benefit from doing that. So I really believe it when he said that, the Giants sold him on this opportunity. Now, I'm also not naive to the fact that the Giants could have said this and not really meant it. They want to bring in a quarterback, a backup quarterback after they lost Tyrod Taylor. So in an effort to bring in guys, you could sell them on the idea, yeah, maybe if you work hard, you learn the playbook, yeah, sure, you could probably start, or you could at least compete. Those were the direct words from John Schneider. You could compete for the job if you sign and play hard and learn the playbook and all that good stuff. I understand that is a reality in a lot of these things, but you look at these two and how their careers have shaped up and just the injury history that follows Daniel Jones. A lot of their backup quarterbacks, Tyrod Taylor got an extended period of time playing last year because of that injury to Daniel Jones and just the constant injuries. And when he's in there, he was healthy for 6 games this past season, and in those 6 games he went 1-5. He won 1 game and lost 5, and then the rest he was just injured, ACL and neck injury that piled up throughout the whole season. And I do understand again that the Giants roster wasn't this super team, that he was the main reason, but it doesn't paint a good picture when you're in there. You're 1-5 as a starter, and then you're out anyway. You're unhealthy, and Tyrod Taylor comes in and plays some pretty solid games to win you some pretty exciting games that I did tune into at some points during their season. So that doesn't really paint a good picture. And if you just look at the two quarterbacks side by side, Drew Lock has only gotten 23 starts compared to Daniel Jones' 59. Drew Lock has a 9-14 record in those games, and Daniel Jones is 22, 36, and 1. 59 completion percentage to Lock and 64 to Jones. Drew Lock has thrown for 5,300 yards, and Daniel Jones almost double that, or over double that, at 12,000. And the touchdown to interception ratio is 28 to 23 to Drew Lock and 62 to 40 for Daniel Jones. Not too much discrepancy there in terms of stats and looking at them. Plus, Daniel Jones has almost 3 times the amount of starts that Drew Lock has. So this whole idea about Drew Lock really not competing, I don't really see it like that he has no chance at all, because at the end of the day, the main point with this, I will say that I would be surprised if Drew Lock just wins the job. If he goes into training camp and he wins the job, I would be shocked if that happened. But in all honesty, based off of the seasons and Drew Lock on how it's all gone, or I should say Daniel Jones, how it's all gone, how could you be so sure that he's going to give you 10 games, 12 games minimum to be in there to give you a good chance? He hasn't really proven that in his time here. I don't know exactly how many games he's played the most in an NFL season, but you've had the neck injuries, the ACLs, the ankle injuries, then you had the fumbling problems. So there's all these things that pile up with Daniel Jones that really doesn't make me feel 110% confident that, one, he's going to be out there, and another, that he's going to play to the level that people saw in that one year when they went to the playoffs and beat the Vikings. It's hard for me to put all my eggs in that basket. So the idea that Drew Lock can be a starting quarterback at some point this year for the Giants, I don't think that's too far out of the realm of possibility based on how Daniel Jones has gone. And if that were to happen, it makes you, again, wonder why maybe this is the reason why they didn't take a quarterback, because they really believe that Drew Lock could compete. And it would be interesting just if this ended up happening, sort of to put a pin in this conversation. If Daniel Jones, let's say he plays pretty bad, he's not doing great, he's healthy but he's just not playing great, then you bring in Drew Lock, I would be interested to see what the reaction is from the New York fans and just the media, the network, or not the network, but the market in New York around that decision, because the fans are already going to be frustrated with Daniel Jones. And if you bring in Drew Lock, who doesn't have the most outstanding resume, and put confidence in him and say that he's going to be your starter, I would love to know what that reaction would be from the New York Giants fans. I mean, you can anticipate what the reaction would be, right? Probably not a positive one, but if Drew Lock goes in, how would they react to that? How much of the heat would go to Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen? How much of them would be on the hot seat after they make a decision like that, really believing in Drew Lock? All those pieces and factors that could play out during a season that really rely on things you can't control, like the injuries and just playing like you're supposed to if you're Daniel Jones on that massive contract. He still has 3 years left. And to make a decision like this is also not ideal, because you're paying him a lot of money and you're only paying Drew Lock $5 million on a 1-year deal. So a lot of heat could come back on the management of the Giants. I'm very interested to see how people would react to that. Maybe I don't think it would happen, but you'd have to start asking the question about, maybe if it goes really bad, is there a point in time where ownership is thinking about letting go of Daboll or Joe Schoen throughout halfway through the season or at some point in the season? All these questions I don't think are impossible to happen, and it all starts with Drew Lock and this quarterback competition that is starting to make some noise around the league, around some analysts, some insiders that follow the Giants and whatnot. It's starting to seem believable, at least. People aren't just turning their heads to it. I'm certainly intrigued, and I'm certainly going to be tuning in to see how this all plays out. But it all starts with Daniel Jones. Of course, he was the high draft pick. He's getting this major contract. It really all depends on him, on how this whole season and his career goes from here. I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out. But for now, we'll leave that conversation there. But coming up on today's show, we have a lot more topics to talk about. One, about the 5th-year option deadline that finalized yesterday. I'm going to be going into that and reacting to some of the players that were picked up and to some that were not. Plus, we're going to be talking about the Dallas Cowboys' new strategy around Ezekiel Elliott coming back, how it could be similar to the past, but also how it has a different flavor to it this time around. All those topics coming up after this break. Stick around. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. To go straight into the second segment around the fifth-year option deadline that is now behind us. It finalized yesterday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and there were a lot of surprises, a lot of decisions to be made around some pretty impactful players for some of these teams, and I went over all of them, all 32, or really 30 picks that had the option for that fifth year, and I'm just basically going to go through them and see which ones I agree with, which ones I don't agree with on this segment. And oddly enough, as you saw there on your screen, Najee Harris was one of the first ones, and I'm going to talk about him extensively because I am a Steelers fan, but also before I do that, just some context behind the fifth-year option deadline. Of all the 32 picks in the first round for the 2021 draft pick or draft year, where the fifth-year option is eligible now, 18 of the 32 first-round draft picks had their options picked up, and it is an increase from last year's when the 2020 class was up for their fifth-year options. This year there was 18. Last year there was only 12 options picked up last year. Those included Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, Tua, Herbert, Burrow, etc. All those guys were some of the major players that had their fifth-year options picked up, and really only Burrow is the one that I mentioned that got an extension, or actually Herbert as well. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee, and Brandon Ayuk and Tua have yet to receive an extension, so time is running out on them. But this year there was that increase, and of those 18 picks that were picked up, there was 14 that weren't picked up, 12 were declined, and 2 that weren't picked up weren't actually eligible. Alex Leatherwood being one of them, picked in the first round, but because he was released and isn't actually on a team, he's not eligible to have that fifth-year option picked up. And Rashad Bateman really has to do with the years and starting, I think, one of the years on the physically unable to perform list. That affected his fifth-year option eligibility. But regardless of that, he signed an extension already, so he's going to be under contract, just no fifth-year option for him. And that's basically what it is. One thing that I will point out that I won't really go into too deep on is that Trevor Lawrence had his fifth-year option picked up as one of the 18 that did. And he's the only quarterback of the top 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round in 2021 that had their option picked up. The other 4 were not picked up by their teams, and they're not even on the teams that drafted them, all 4 of them. So that is its own story on how these quarterbacks are selected and the projections and everything like that. But that's a whole different story. I mentioned Najee Harris before. He was the last player I saw from the internet, from the sources and everything, that got his option declined. It came around 3:55 p.m. Eastern Time, right at that deadline, as the Steelers usually do, like to keep everybody on their toes. And He had a fifth-year option of $6.7 million. If the Steelers were to pick it up, they decided against it. And it came at a bit of a surprise for me because of what Najee Harris has meant for this team, just following this team as a fan, and I'm sure anybody else who just follows the NFL would see that Najee, the way that the Steelers and he sort of interact, he seemed like a pretty pivotal part. Mike Tomlin talks glowingly about him. He seems well respected around the organization already and within his teammates. As a leader already stepping into that role, that plus on the field, he's produced 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons in his first 3 years in the league. He's the only Steeler in their history to do that in their first 3 years. And he joined some elite company if he did it this coming year for the first 4 years of his NFL career. So he's put up the numbers. He has the pedigree in the organization to pick it up. And then when the Steelers declined it, I still, again, like I mentioned, was pretty surprised by it. And it just goes into that, one, the running back market being devalued. At 6.7, even if they picked up that option, I didn't think that was too expensive to pick up, with Najee being one of your most impactful players. Plus, I think the most important thing is that 1-2 punch that they were trying to build around this whole offense with Arthur Smith, drafting these offensive linemen, really emphasizing the run game. But then you don't pick up the fifth-year option on Harris, making him eligible to be a free agent this coming year. It's a bit contradicting with what the Steelers want to do and what their actions are showing. So it comes at a bit of a surprise to me, but, this could always, motivate Najee, get him to play extremely well, then he earns another contract. But, history's not on their side. The Steelers haven't given out a second contract to a running back since 2006. And you've got players like Le'Veon Bell, James Conner as the most prominent running backs since that time. They played great for the Steelers, but unfortunately, just on this trend that keeps going, the Steelers haven't given them a second contract. And if the trend continues, this could be the last year we see of Najee Harris in a Steelers uniform up till now. But that is Najee. That is one player that didn't. The other ones were the quarterbacks, like I mentioned, and these, like I said before, aren't really too big of a surprise just because of how their careers have panned out. None of them have really stepped into that role of being the guy for their organization, so much so that they all got traded away from the teams that drafted them already, except Trevor Lawrence. Zach Wilson had a $22.4 million fifth-year option. Obviously, the Jets weren't going to pick that up. He was probably the second or third string now, with Tyrod Taylor coming in there to back up Aaron Rodgers. So that didn't make too much sense for them. He goes to the Broncos, and they don't pick it up. So will Zach Wilson now compete and maybe earn a different contract with the Broncos or maybe somewhere else now that they have Bo Nix? You'd think you'd have to play him because he is the same age as Zach Wilson, has played very well for Oregon, and now he comes in there to have this quarterback battle. Can that motivate Zach Wilson, plus the fifth-year option not getting picked up? That's a tale that we have to see play out, but that's something interesting to monitor. Trey Lance is the other, now on the Cowboys. They don't pick it up. He had almost a $25 to $23 million fifth-year option. That wasn't too much of a surprise. Justin Fields, another one for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Basically on that one-year deal, his fifth-year option would have cost $25.6. Way too expensive for the Steelers, not even having played a snap for them so far. And he's tailored in as the backup as of now, so that's an expensive price tag for a second option quarterback. Same with Mac Jones. He gets traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's probably their backup, and he might not stay too long. Also, if Trevor Lawrence stays healthy, you don't see too much of Mac playing. I'm sure he'd want to stay there because he is from that area. Of course, then the Jaguars and Mac could negotiate a longer, more cheaper, long-term deal for him to just stay there and be the backup if he's content with that. But again, with him, he had a $25.6 million fifth-year option. Not too much sense there for the Jaguars to pick that up. Other notable ones that did get their options picked up were Devontae Smith. A while ago, I talked about it. They picked up his fifth-year option, and they also extended him, making it sort of a 5 to 4 year long contract extension after his 5th year is done. Great business there by the Philadelphia Eagles to lock down one of their star wide receivers for the predominant future. Not too much of a surprise there. I thought an extension would get done, and then they wouldn't have to pick up the 5th year option, but they did both, and that's that. Then another one, which is interesting and just something to monitor, is Micah Parsons, as you see on the screen. The Cowboys did pick up his 5th year option. It will cost them $24 million on that 1 year deal, essentially. And that's something to watch because of everything that's going on with Dak and CeeDee. And CeeDee is playing now on his 5th year option because of last year, the Cowboys picking it up. So now he will be on that 5th year option this coming year. If no extension is hashed out, he'll be a free agent next offseason. And then next offseason, are you going to want to have Micah Parsons play on his 5th year option without getting to an extension? It has bought you a bit more time to figure out CeeDee, but the Cowboys really have to figure these contracts and their numbers out. Plus, you also have, just your quarterback as well looking for a deal, so no real problem there for the Cowboys to figure out. 3 of their most impactful players are right here at the deadline for them. I keep saying it. I think they're just bound to lose one of them, probably Dak. At this point, it doesn't seem too positive right now, but we'll have to see. But anyway, no surprise for Micah Parsons to pick up his 5th year option at $24 million next year if he plays on it as well. And going down the line, all of these seem pretty much expected. Greg Newsome, I mentioned it on a YouTube short. He got his option picked up at pick number 26. Penei Sewell, he got a $19 million 5th year option picked up, plus a massive extension for him with the Detroit Lions, making him one of or the highest paid lineman in the league. I think he is the highest paid lineman with that new deal. I'm 90% sure, but there could be some discrepancy there. Jamar Chase is another one with the wide receiver market. How crazy it is with Justin Jefferson and CeeDee, like I just talked about. He'll be playing on his 5th year option next year if it gets to that without an extension. The Bengals have T. Higgins. They just signed Joe Burrow to a massive extension. Of course, they're going to want to have Jamar Chase on a huge contract, probably exceeding $31 or $32 million, just because I expect Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb to get their deals before Jamar does. He'll probably cost the Bengals anywhere between $32 to up till $35 million per year. That's a huge contract to have on your books. So how does that affect T. Higgins and Joe Burrow if you restructure their contracts, do all of that salary cap gymnastics with it? That's something that's coming up to monitor as well. And just to wrap it up here with other players that didn't get their options picked up, one that surprised me a little bit could have been Kadarius Toney. He had a $14.3 million 5th year option with the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs, what's funny about it is that some people will say that Kadarius Toney hasn't really proven it on the field. He had that incident last year with saying stuff about not being injured, the Chiefs just not wanting to play him. It created a whole other situation off the field, and I think the Chiefs have been good to Kadarius Toney and just protecting him and supporting him and stuff like that. It doesn't come at a huge surprise, but just the way that the Chiefs have been treating him, I just thought they'd pick it up. But I could see why they didn't, and now he'll be on an expiring contract as well. And on the other side, Pat Surtain, he got his option picked up. No surprise there. $19.8 million for him. Close to the max. I want to say the max is $22 million or $21 million per year to the highest paid corner. So that's right there. I'm sure he'll get close to that or exceed that depending on the year that he has. But those are really most of the ones that drew most people in, that caught my eye most of all, with how their options fell and how much money they were supposed to earn and the decisions that these teams made. Some coming and more of a surprise than others. Really, no one surprised me more than Najee Harris. He'll be certainly the one I pay the most attention to on how this all plays out because of how the Steelers have talked about their running game, that 1-2 punch he has with Jaylen Warren. If it all works out perfectly in this perfect world for the Steelers and both of them have great years, their offense is looking great, maybe he becomes the first running back since 2006 for the Steelers to get a second contract. I would certainly be a fan of it, but it all depends on the Steelers and how these young players they have on offense, Arthur Smith coming in as their offensive coordinator, all sort of gel together, not to mention 2 new quarterbacks in there. A lot of ifs, buts, and maybes with the Steelers and Najee on an expiring deal. Something to keep an eye on for sure, but we're just going to have to see how it plays out. And that'll be that for the fifth-year option players, and that'll be that for this segment. A lot more coming up on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I mentioned before the return of Ezekiel Elliott to the Cowboys and how this time it might look a little bit different than his first 5 seasons there in Dallas. Plus, we're going to talk about Jason Kelce addressing the rumors of him joining ESPN and that Monday Night Football Countdown crew. Those 2 stories are coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into the show on the third topic on today's episode around the Cowboys running back situation. The biggest news recently is that Ezekiel Elliott, one of their top running backs in recent memory, has returned to the city of Dallas after their starting running back Tony Pollard last season signed for the Tennessee Titans in free agency. They bring back Zeke on a 1-year, $3 million deal, and it's not something that initially, from what I've seen on the reactions and things like that from fans and analysts and whatnot, it's not something that will convince many fans, I'm sure, when the news was announced, but it looks to be now a different approach with Zeke and this running back room that the Cowboys are trying to take advantage of this coming season. Before any of this was really announced, Zeke had his names in the rumors, linking him to the Dallas Cowboys, and you had Jerry Jones say that he still saw Zeke as a running back 1, as a starter in this league. Zeke also said after he signed with the Cowboys that he still feels like he is a running back 1 on any team, still as a capable starter in the NFL. I'm sure when you compare him to the Cowboys running back room right now, you have Rico Dowdle, Deuce Vaughn, and Royce Freeman. Of course, Zeke is going to be the running back 1 on that team. He is only 28 years old, so, it's not like he's in the 30s, and bringing him back was this whole questionable decision. I'm sure it raised some eyebrows, but he still has 2 to 3 years left in him before, like most other teams, they reach this cliff almost drop point where they just drop, and really teams have a hard time looking at these running backs over 30 and paying them a significant amount of money. It usually seems that $3 to $6 million, $5 million is the range for running backs now, which is crazy how far that market has dropped since just a few years ago with Zeke as well. With his time in the Dallas Cowboys, he had that massive deal. I forget how much. I want to say it was like 5 years, $90 million or something like that, in that range for Zeke. And he was one of the first running backs to earn 15 $16 million per year. And now to see where he is now, ironically back with the Dallas Cowboys, it is nuts to see. But this time around, I mentioned back in his previous time with the Cowboys and being their starter out of Ohio State and really racking up some of the most impressive seasons we've seen for a running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Now he comes back, and there is a bit of a shift now that the Cowboys, I believe, and that they've said they view with this whole experiment now with Zeke coming back. Specifically, Will McClay, the Cowboys vice president of player personnel, was the latest person to add and address Zeke's return, saying that Ezekiel Elliott still does a lot of things that a lot of starting caliber running backs still do. He still shows the ability is still there within him, so they feel comfortable with having Zeke lead this new running back room, this young, inexperienced room. But more specifically, he did open the door to this running back by committee approach by saying, I think the running back position this day and age is not that old school one guy as the lead back and the others fill in. It's a group by committee. What he'll add to the group, we're excited about it. That's what Will McClay said on not just Zeke, but this entire room that it seems that they're really embracing. And not to say that they're settling with just bringing in Zeke and, that's it, that's what we're going to do. I'm sure fans and other analysts would like them to make another move to bring in more talent to that position, maybe a younger running back to kind of complement Zeke and still have that sort of idea of a running back by committee, because I can understand it. Nowadays, you see the Steelers, the Detroit Lions, the Cleveland Browns, almost to an extent with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. You had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. I just talked about Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. All those groups of running backs have had a lot of success, specifically last season. All those teams made the playoffs and had very impressive running games, that 1-2 punch that now seems that the NFL is trending towards. But Dallas really hasn't fell into that group as of late. It's usually been a one-guy sort of show with the other guys ironically filling in, like Will McClay said that they're not trying to do. That's sort of been the trend in Dallas these last few years. You look at Tony Pollard, he had Rico Dowdle come in a few times and spot him. Before that, you had Zeke, and then you had Tony Pollard kind of come in and spot him. He impressed a lot more than Rico Dowdle did, so the Cowboys felt that they could move on from Zeke. And before that, you had guys like DeMarco Murray as well, having great seasons with them, really just being that workhorse running back, racking up all the yards, all the stats that really brought him into this spotlight of the National Football League as one of the top guys. That's really been their MO recently for the Cowboys, just riding the coattails of this one running back. So seeing them transition, it makes sense. I can be open to it, but they haven't really done it yet. And the guys that they have in the running back room is one of the biggest questions I have. How much trust do you have in Deuce Vaughn? Rico Dowdle, I guess, probably the most since you saw some of him last year, but you have Royce Freeman in there now as well. Not really been in the Dallas Cowboys locker room, hasn't really seen how it all operates. Of course, people hear about it, but once you're in there, I think it does come as a shock to a lot of people, so how does he adjust to that? And having this lead running back, having Zeke as your lead running back, how much confidence you have in him to have him produce behind this offensive line that I can't fail to mention have lost some pieces. Of course, they drafted some just last week in the NFL draft, but it's still a lot of moving pieces on the offensive line especially. You always have to deal with injuries. You can't plan for it, but that's something you have to keep in mind. And you look at Zeke, if he is going to be your lead running back, his carries and his yards have decreased every season from the past 5 seasons. He's coming off a year when he only had 235 carries, 4 or 5, or not 5 touchdowns. He only had 5 starts for the New England Patriots in 2023, and only 235 carries for them as well. That is hard, at least for me, to convince me that he's going to be your lead back, and then you're going to have some of these other guys come in and have this 1-2 punch with a older running back that isn't really riding any momentum coming back to Dallas, and these young, inexperienced guys that haven't really proven to be number ones or even number two running backs in the league so far. So how they make it work with the offensive line and piecing that together, trying to find other weapons outside of CeeDee Lamb. It all has to work out perfectly, I believe, for this to seem pretty efficient, at least to the level they showed last year. You had Tony Pollard in there in his second year, now stepping in as the starter. The offensive line was still pretty much together. CeeDee Lamb broke out and had a great year. Now teams are going to be prepared for it a little bit, try to take that away. And how does Zeke and this running back group try to take advantage of that? More people in coverage, not as loaded as a box as they have seen in the past. The opportunity is there for them, but I still have my doubts about it. And on this running back by committee, now that I saw the Dallas Cowboys talk about it and I mentioned other teams sort of trending in that direction, I couldn't help but think that this is almost, a new excuse, a new reason why not to pay these running backs a lot of money. It's just a thought that came into my head while I was writing down these notes, It's not something I'll get into extensively today, but just to mention it here off of this conversation we're having around the Cowboys and Zeke and this running back committee. The running back market has been very devalued recently. A lot of people just don't have trust in one running back being the guy. As much as they catch the ball out of the backfield, run 15 times, 20 times a game, pass block, and just do everything for these offenses, the trust is still not there, and it is diminishing over the last few years from guys like Todd Gurley, Zeke, ironically, and these sort of guys. Christian McCaffrey's the only one that's getting that type of number per year. I think he's at $15 to $17 million per year, if that. But I know he is the highest guy, but it is slowly diminishing because of this new approach, this new trend that is sort of starting to seep into all the NFL teams. And I just see it as a way now for these teams, these general managers, these coaches to look at running backs and think, well, we have a running back by committee. Everybody's chipping in. Why should this one guy get a lot of money regardless of how much he's done? It doesn't seem fair that one running back should make $12, $14 million per year. That's sort of the idea that I'm projecting that these teams will say to try and avoid paying these running backs, these one guys, these Saquon Barkleys, these Derrick Henrys, these Josh Jacobs, these massive deals, because now, the hot new trendy thing is that we have a running back committee. We're not going to pay just one guy all this money because everybody chips in. This isn't just a one-man show, so he shouldn't receive a lot of money. I'm not saying the Steelers are thinking this way, but it is sort of making me relate this back to the Steelers because Najee, how much more can Najee do to connect back to that other segment, other than having 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons as a running back with an offense that hasn't been great. How much more does he have to prove to earn a contract that's worth more than $10 million per year? They didn't pick up the 5th-year option. There's some doubts there that he could be gone now. With Jaylen Warren in there, I'm sure people think that the Steelers could just bring in another running back because they found somebody in Jaylen, and it seems easy to just plug in and plug out these running backs ongoing, back after back in the NFL. And I just think this new idea of a running back committee is really not helping the running backs as much as it is benefiting these teams. It could come as a detriment to the running backs, the one player that is very talented and trying to get a massive second contract. It could hurt them a little bit. That's just something that I thought of that could be something that could go wrong with this approach. But, the Dallas Cowboys are thinking about their team. They're trying to get this team better, and they're going all in apparently this year. So they're trying to get this team as ready as it can be for this season. They believe Zeke can lead this group. I still have my doubts, but, we'll see how the Dallas Cowboys season plays out. They have a lot of big decisions to make, but this seems like one area where they seem pretty content with heading into 2024. But anyway, in saying that, we can move on to the last break of the show. And on the other side, stay tuned because we're going to be talking about one of the most famous Eagles players, Jason Kelce, just announcing his retirement, what sort of plans he intends to get into next year when he won't be playing football, but he has said there is a rumor out there that he still will be really connected to the NFL. Find out in what way after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. For this last segment, before I jump into all the details around this last topic, one last time, if you guys have any questions or comments you want to make during today's show, to use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, as you see there on your screen. By using this link, your questions will pop up in my chat box. I can read them on air and get your guys' thoughts, perspective on anything I say or on the topic at hand. It's a lot more engaging and it's a massive help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. So if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. I'll greatly appreciate it, and everybody at the network as well would send a big thank you to you guys for doing that. But on the last topic on today's show, to wrap up the week, I'm sure most of you have seen it, have heard other people talking about it. Jason Kelce addressing those ESPN reports that say he is the newest member of the Monday Night Countdown pregame show for Monday Night Football, obviously. If you aren't aware, already on that crew, Scott Van Pelt, Ryan Clark, Marcus Spears, they had RG3 on there a few times. I know they had Larry Fitzgerald as well at some points, maybe not every pregame, but he was on there last season. So now Jason Kelce reportedly, allegedly has agreed to be on that show. For the first time, Jason Kelce talked about it on his podcast, the New Heights podcast with his brother Travis Kelce, and he basically said to start, that nothing has been inked on paper yet, but regardless of that, it was a tremendous honor, in his words, to be considered for a role like this. He's never been in broadcasting or anything like that. He's obviously been playing. He has a podcast, but this is a very new realm for him, and he goes more into it in his podcast about trying this new realm after playing, and how he'll have to learn really what this whole new area entails, what sort of ins and outs there is to this business. But he definitely hasn't said no to it, but he made sure to say that it isn't 1,000% going to happen. He reportedly received offers from other networks as well. As soon as he announced his retirement, NBC was at his door, CBS. Those pregame shows were offering a role similar to this that ESPN did. According to The Athletic's Andrew Marchand, he mentioned that Amazon could have included in a deal for for Jason Kelce to join their Thursday Night Football pregame show. If he were to do that, they could have taken in his New Heights podcast with his brother, Travis Kelce, to be featured on Amazon Prime exclusively as their new home. Right now it's being shown on YouTube. Maybe they could have worked out a deal there with Amazon to bring the podcast over, as well as getting Jason Kelce to join that crew. But nothing has been reported from there. It was an offer, but it seems like it just seems like a matter of time before Jason Kelce officially signs to ESPN. On that topic, he said throughout the whole process, meeting and talking to everybody over at ESPN, it became apparent that it was really the right fit at the end of the day. Something that I'm really, really looking forward to in this next phase. So he seems pretty content, pretty sure that this is the right move, but he has to still sign, apparently. There is still time. He doesn't have to do it now. I'm sure ESPN feel that they're close with Jason Kelce, and to bring him in, I don't have to explain what they're getting in Jason Kelce. If you watch the podcast or if you don't watch the podcast, you see it everywhere on social media or on the internet. People are interested in what he's saying. He has some pretty funny clips out there. He is very entertaining. Whether it's at a Bills game, at a Super Bowl party, on his podcast, people will tune in to see Jason Kelce. And if ESPN is able to pull this off, bearing any 180-degree turns on his decision, I think this would work perfectly for both ESPN and Jason Kelce. Not only for ESPN to bring in Kelce and get his insights, really pick his brain, to give the audience a new perspective from an offensive lineman, seeing the game differently than maybe a Ryan Clark who played defense, who played safety, Marcus Spears as well. You get a different perspective from Jason Kelce, and especially just coming off of retirement, getting a new feel for the league and some of these guys that are still currently playing, who he played against or with. I think all of that, a lot of people will tune in, and I think ESPN is doing the right thing by just waiting, chomping at the bit to see which player retires next and trying to entice them into joining them in some facet. Kelce has the personality, the knowledge, like I mentioned, to be great at this job. I expect him to sign. It seems pretty evident now, and I would be looking forward to it a lot if he signed and joining that ESPN crew. Similarly, to pivot into something related to this, ESPN continues to add these guys on. It is reported that Bill Belichick also plans to be a recurring guest on the Manning Cast, an alternate streaming option if you choose not to go the traditional route with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. There is the Manning Cast, and it is reported that Bill Belichick could be a reoccurring guest on there. So, you have Peyton Manning, Eli, and Bill Belichick all talking about football. That, again, is very much must-see TV for anybody to listen to some of the greatest minds and players in the league. That certainly seems like the right way to go if you're ESPN. And also on Bill Belichick, he recently featured on the Pat McAfee show NFL Draft Spectacular, covering the entirety of the first round. If you tuned in or just saw a clip of it afterwards, they seem to have agreed prematurely on Bill Belichick also being a reoccurring guest on the Pat McAfee show. I'm sure they have to figure out the dates and when what he'll be talking about, but they seem to have just a verbal agreement to have Bill Belichick on there. I'm sure Pat McAfee would love that. He wasn't going to say no, so Bill Belichick could be another one, another former player, former player or coach involved with ESPN. He hasn't officially retired, so that's the only difference there with Jason Kelce, like I was talking about. But we're going to be seeing a lot of Bill Belichick on ESPN apparently this coming season. Now that he didn't really get a head coaching job, he'll still be involved in the NFL in some facet. And again, I think that's great. Picking the brain of Bill Belichick. He sort of opened up a little bit on the Pat McAfee show. You saw him smile a little bit more. He seemed to be having fun, cracking some jokes, laughing. I'm sure it was very awkward for some people to see Bill Belichick like that, but, I thought it was cool seeing him from a different perspective, under a different light. And just to wrap it up, touching on other subjects in broadcasting, I won't go too much into it. You have Tom Brady over at Fox. He's projected to be on the A-team there. I can't remember the name of the play-by-play announcer now. It's Kevin Burkhardt. He's going to be with him in the booth for those Fox games. Of course, if he doesn't unretire and play for the Las Vegas Raiders, that is his plan right now, but you never know with Tom Brady. Matt Ryan will be on NFL Today. I talked about that on a YouTube short. He'll be on that pregame show for the CBS games. And all these guys are now just transitioning to television. I think it's great, starting with Jason Kelce going to ESPN, and these other guys as well. It is a new sort of wave of players coming in and taking over the broadcasting side now. It is this massive cycle that just continues to go on from the NFL to the broadcasting side. And on the Jason Kelce note, one more thing I'll say is that, with Jason Kelce now being on there and Travis also being a prominent member of this podcast, it is both of theirs, and him appearing more and more on television, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, similar to the Pat McAfee show that started on YouTube, if the New Heights podcast also ended up featuring on ESPN as well as YouTube. That similar sort of model you see with the Pat McAfee show. They're on ESPN for an hour or two, then they continue on YouTube. I wouldn't be surprised if the Kelce's work out a deal like this with ESPN, not for their benefit, but for both the company and Jason Kelce. It just seems too obvious not to happen. I'm sure both would be happy to work it out if the numbers align. But that's really the last thing I wanted to mention there. It all just continues to cycle on through. Jason Kelce, we could be seeing him on Monday nights. I'm hoping that is the case, but he still has to confirm it. But on that note, and wrapping up with ESPN and Jason Kelce, that'll do it for today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning into today's episode. And just please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as keeping up with the social media platforms around the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for all the live recorded shows, full shows that are all on both channels. YouTube Shorts are all posted on both of those channels as well, on top of the individual segment videos that if you missed a certain segment or don't have time to watch a whole show, you have the opportunity to see just specific segment videos on both of the YouTube channels as well. And as a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to talk more NFL and just football in general with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, signing off for this week. Hopefully you guys all have a great weekend, and I hope to see you guys back here joining me on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.